mother, Joan Allison Headley. Her father, Headley, married Frances Mackenzie, sister of Alec, who pretty well started the grove. He didn't start it, but he made it what it is. And father was Toronto family, related to the Hamiltons of Queenston, and his mother's family were the Polsons, who ran the Polson Iron Works in Toronto, and at one point also in Owen Sound. They built the first steel ship in Canada, and they also built many of the steam engines that were in our lake steamers. As a small boy, I often went into those engine rooms, and there was the brass plaque on the bulkhead, Polson Iron Works. Very pleasing. So they have a connection. My mother's mother was killed in a train accident in 1915, and she was then brought up by Professor Michael Mackenzie, another brother of Alec, and spent most of her summers at the Grove and Stony Lake. So both of them have a connection, however tenuous, to Lakefield.
And where were you born in?
Born in Toronto, but parents living in Oakville at that time, right on the on Lake Ontario, right beside the harbour, which was a wonderful place to grow up. My first 13 years.
So you would go to school in Oakville as a...
I did. I went to school in the public schools to grade 5, and then 6, 7, and 8 as a day boy, bicycling out to Appleby, a boys' school quite close to Oakville.
And then you moved to Lakefield. When did your family actually move to Lakefield?
Well, the family came to Young's Point in 1947. And father had the same eye condition that many of you know that I have. And mother wanted him out of the city. And it wasn't very long up here before he didn't drive anymore. Which explains why I got my driving license at age 15. A year early, because family needed another driver. In those days, the bureaucrats could make happy decisions. Father always said that he'd arranged that we would have bread on the table, but there wouldn't be any jam unless he found some things to do. And what they found to do was cottage management and real estate, and both worked quite well. And I had a lot of fun helping with the cottage management. I even learned how to burgle. When you got to an island and didn't have the keys, you weren't going to waste the time to go all the way back to get them.
And you went
Put that to bad use later too.
You went to your high school years were
At the Grove.
at the Grove.
For 4 of them. And then because my sister was living way out at Beach Lake and about to have her first child, and her husband was posted away down to the States with the Navy, I was movable. So I went out to live at Beach Lake and had my final year at Lisgar Collegiate, which was a very happy accident because of my class at the Grove. Not one of them got their grade 13 in that year. They all failed. It was suggested that Booty needed them all back to make the hockey team better the next year. But anyway, at Lisgar, which was one of the top high schools in the province in those days, they got me to work. And I did get my grade 13 in that year and got a Navy League scholarship into Royal Roads Military College out on the West Coast.
You were telling me the other night when you went to high school to the Grove, you lived south of Young's Point.
Well, no, right, very close to St. Aidan's Church.
Okay, right there, okay.
Up in behind, between St. Aidan's and the school.
And you rode your bicycle all the way?
I did, right through that first winter, 47, 48. And many of you will remember that in those days, there wasn't very much traffic. I often went the whole distance to school in the morning and back at night without seeing another car or truck going either way. Believe that now.
Believe that today.
And furthermore, they didn't get around to plowing it for 3 or 4 days after a snowstorm. And I well remember, some of you might recall that at Lakefield, Dr. Mackenzie said, wanted the boys out in the sunshine after the noon meal, and then they went back into class at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when the sun was going down in the winter. Late classes. Well, late classes got out at 5:30, and I bicycled home in the dark that winter. So, sometimes through 8 inches of snow. I never thought to ask to be let off that, and apparently Mom and Dad never thought to ask me if I minded.
And you also said that you did canoe down there.
Yes.
From there to the school occasionally also, paddle your canoe.
Yeah, I skied to school more than once. That was good, except for the fences. Riding the bicycle was bad news because every farm dog had his territory, and the first one let the next one know, all the way down. But the best way to get to school was by canoe, down that river, and it was a sleigh ride in the morning, and hard work going home at night. This was in May and June of 1950 and 1951. That was marvelous. You could put your memory work down in the bottom of the canoe and memorize your poetry on the way to school.
I couldn't remember it anyways.
Well, I didn't remember it long.
And you also went to university, I understand, Queen's University.
Well, that was after I graduated from the military college in '54, and then went straight into the Navy, and I had joined the Navy, permanent force. That was the time of the Korean War, you may remember, and that seemed the thing to do. And after the 2 years at the military college, I went off to the Royal Naval Engineering College at Plymouth, England, and that was a wonderful experience, which included some sea time in British warships and also a good deal of recreational sailing in the Channel and the Bay of Biscay, and gave me an opportunity to join the Royal Ocean Racing Club. The only other person I know of, a Canadian who was a member, was Admiral Hugh Pullen, who also has a Lakefield connection. He went to that school. Then, when the Navy found out the eye defect and sent me home, that's when I became a schoolmaster, Len.
Right.
And so I knew that Booty Smith was short of staff, and I asked him if he wanted to have me for the year, and he said he'd let me know, and he came back a week later and said, sure, we'd like you for $1,000 the whole year.
That's all right.
But I had room and board. And I saved 950 of it because the next year, as I found I liked that life, and apparently the school was satisfied, I went to Queen's for a summer, a winter, and a summer to patch up a degree, which the military colleges didn't give in those days. So there you got the university. Well, it was OCE after the end of that, but that was 5 years later.
Okay.
After I'd learned how to teach, then I went to the teacher college.
Booty Smith was the headmaster.
Yeah, Winder Smith.
Winder
Give him his
Smith.
proper name.
They called him Booty, so Winder Smith was really who he was. I think he sure looked after a lot of kids for hockey equipment when he was up there, I think.
And hockey games on Saturday morning.
Yes.
And hot chocolate.
And outdoor rink up there at the Grove too. So. What hobbies do you have? Should I ask that?
Well, my life, sailing,
Yeah, right.
paddling,
Right.
woodworking,
Right.
carving. There's one little piece up here that I carved a few years ago, a present for my late wife. But mostly it's been building maintenance and also new cottage type building. But nothing, no cabinetry, not that good. Music, listening to music. I don't know how to read it, but I know a great deal of music and have a huge collection of 78 RPM, 33 RPM, some 45s too, and now the discs, of course, and some tape. But maybe 10,000 pieces altogether. Not sure. The boys wondered at one point at the Grove, and so I said, well, come in on Saturday afternoon and count them. And they got to 2,500 back in 1960.
And you have a brother, or no?
I had a brother.
Yeah.
I had a brother who was drowned in Lake Ontario.
Oh, you did, okay.
And that, I think, is very significant. For those of us who have always lived on water, near water, I believe it was absolutely magnificent of my parents, after losing a son to drowning, to bring up the other three of us up, to enjoy and have no fear of water. And that must have been very difficult.
You have an older sister, you told me, and a younger sister also?
Yep, I'm the sandwich.
Yeah, you're in between, so. Your younger sister, I think, went to school here in Lakefield?
She did?
Yeah.
Yes, Young's Point and Lakefield,
Right,
and PCBS.
right. And your older sister, she graduated as a nurse from
Nichols Hospital.
Lakefield Hospital? Yep.
And when they opened the Civic, it was my sister Sonny who gave the roses to Louis Saint Laurent, and he kissed her. That is also significant because a good deal of her training she got from Dr. Gassel, Billy or Francis Mackenzie, who was the head night nurse, cousin, and also Dr. G. Stewart Cameron, who was my late wife's grandfather. He was the head of the hospital, I think, in those days.
And you also taught school to the high school over here for a few years also?
Yes. 14 years at the Grove and then 17 at the high school.
And what did you teach at the high school here in Lakefield?
Almost totally mathematics. A couple of years there was some general science, but otherwise mathematics. Grade 9 to 13. Both level 5 and level 4.
Do you have any highlights that are outstanding in your life, Don, that you care to remember with us? Or,
Well, as I told you last night, Glenn, I consider that I've been very, very lucky. I've never wanted for much. I was never unemployed. We were born at a very fortunate time. Too young for the war, too young to know about the Depression, although I did admit one or two strangers into the house because they said they wanted a drink of water or something when I was 3, and there's a photograph of that child there. I was told not to do that again. They came home and found one stretched out on the Chesterfield. I didn't know it was a depression. As I say, too young for the war. In the services at the time of Korea, but they were sending us to school then. So that wasn't dangerous. And then ended up schoolmastering, and that mostly wasn't dangerous. There were 1 or 2 occasions when it got exciting. Particularly at the end when my vision had decreased so much that 35 still in the classroom, and I could only see them one at a time, and that got, as I say, interesting. But very, very lucky.
and I see you have down here that you're in the Sea Cadets. Now, they had cadets at the Grove at the time you were there?
Yes, as a boy, I was in the Sea Cadets, and my year at Lisgar, I also joined, and that's how I got the Navy League scholarship to the military college. But then, when I came back to teach at the Grove, I was an ex-naval officer. I was automatically in the cadet corps, as were all the boys. They didn't have any choice; they joined, and that is how I became quite a senior Sea Cadet officer, because it went by the size of your corps. And I had more than 150 boys in my corps, so I became a lieutenant commander, Royal Canadian Sea Cadets. Very few of them. And the year that I went to Queen's, I went and served at the Kingston Sea Cadet Corps too. The Queen's venture also made a huge difference in my life, Len, because the brigantine St. Lawrence too had just been brought into, had been launched and started to train boys. And I had always read about the age of sail and thought I'd missed it, but I found it. This wonderful little ship with polished brass and shining mahogany and cordage by the many yards, the miles, I guess. And I ended up being a captain of that vessel and another one, sister ship out of Toronto called Pathfinder, which has a school connection because it was a parent of one of the boys who, bringing his boy back after Christmas, they'd seen the Swedish movie about sail training. And he said, what a pity we didn't have this in Canada. And I said, oh, come with me, we have. Showed him a poster that we'd made to try and interest the boys. And so he was in the steel business and he was often in Kingston, and he went to meet the builder, the designer, and they got one going in Toronto, and now there are two in Toronto.
And you have marked down here, this last little sheet you got in here, the waterfront at the Grove.
Yes?
Did you,
all the time I was there, I was never an athlete except paddling, sailing, swimming, and gymnastics. But the Grove didn't have that much. So I looked after the waterfront, and I did that in the spring and the fall. So I had a lot to do at that waterfront. Some days in June, I didn't know any better. There might be 200 boys down on that waterfront, and I was the only adult. Frightening to think about today. Wouldn't be allowed anymore, of course. But I had lots of senior boys that I trained, and they also were making sure that things were running properly. So I didn't ever lose one.
you were married, and
Yes. I married Dr. Cameron's granddaughter. Her father, also Dr. Cameron, who attended this school because when his mother died when he was 8, and his father remarried, and she would have not very much to do with him, and dismantled his room, and he was sent off to live with Dr. Mackenzie. And in the summers, he camped on Stony Lake. His father gave him a canoe and a tent, I guess, said go. So he loved Stony Lake, but I was privileged to know him, to be able to marry his daughter, and unfortunately the wretched cancer got her 10 years ago. And I just happened to see, I passed Len a photograph with my notes. I didn't mean to. It meant to be out here. 2 weeks ago, I finally got around to making a little box for some of Nora's ashes, and they're now under her stone at Little Lake. She had a son, and he's in Calgary. I spent 2 days with him on my way out the west coast a few weeks ago. And he comes to the lake with every other summer.
You told me the other night that you had a few rides on the Waukeeta.
Oh yes.
Is that right?
Yes, indeed. And the Waukeeta and the Bessie Butler. I had dinner aboard the Bessie Butler one night. Kay and Harold Young entertained me in the grand salon with the crested china of the Boyd family, and it was a very grand affair for a 15-year-old. But also, somehow, I don't know how it was arranged, but I would be taken to Young's Point in the morning and get aboard one of the little steamboats and spend the whole day. And down in the engine room and all over the place. Wonderful. Also, our cottage was down in the bottom of Mackenzie Bay, and the Islinda went to the west of Big Island every day. And oh, how we waited for that, and we watched the Islinda go by, and then by the waves would come and jump in, and we'd get the biggest waves on the lake. Because she was definitely the biggest boat on the lake in those days. My young sister, Joan, had trouble with S's, and she always waited for the day that the Tony Lake Teamer came by.
And you said you remembered that the Waukeeta kind of was up grounded, was it?
There was a night, yes. I understand, I don't remember the captain's name, but this would have been about 1946 or so. And one night they managed to get the Waukeeta high and dry on a rock that wasn't too far underwater, just to the southeast of Big Island. And because they were going south, carrying a loaded barge of naphthalene, cyanide, the barge carried them up onto this shoal. And you know how they got her off? They took the barge, and they think they got the Bessie Butler, or maybe it was the Islinda, to get the barge going just as fast the other way, and as she went by, they lassoed her, and she dragged her off. The Waukeeta, by the way, was the private steam yacht of Prime Minister Laurier.
Right.
She was a very fine-looking vessel. And one of the photographs that you have in the collection, I think in the Deladon group, because I brought it to you in the store, is my photograph of the Waukeeta in front of the old rink, where the present rink is, but the previous building, or two previous buildings, is it? Forget.
Anyways,
The one that was there in 1950.
yeah. Anything else you can think of, Michael?
Well,
I got these pages, I got them tonight, but I didn't read them all over sometime.
Eileen,
When did your parents get the island?
Majestic Isle?
Majestic, yeah.
1949.
Oh.
And the way they got that is quite fun. Father always went from Kawartha Park up to Juniper Way, going to the west of Big Island. But the day that he had the directors of the YWCA with him in the boat, because they wanted to sell Camp Ingleston, a big cottage which they had run as a girls' camp near Juniper Island. And they couldn't do it anymore, and they wanted to sell that property. So Father took about 3 Peterborough women up, and he decided to go on the other side of Big Island. And as they passed by Majestic Island, so named on the chart, because the steamer Majestic used to make fast there overnight. And so it became Majestic Island. It's on the charts that way. And they said as they passed, by the way, if you sell the camp, this is for sale too. And Father just said, sold. And the Green family of Peterborough were very upset because they had counted it as their fishing island forever. And they missed it. That's real estate.
Does anyone have any questions for Michael? Would they like to ask him anything at all? Mary?
Why was he called Booty? What was the,
Because as a little boy, when he went to the school, somehow or other, he acquired the nickname of Bumbling Booty.
oh,
And that was written down in one of the school magazines. And I guess, well, things will get found out.
yeah.
Oh, he's Booty, that's all. Or when I was at school, he was often referred to as the boss.
Mike, what year did you teach up there?
When did I teach?
Up the Grove.
56 to 70.
Okay, you must have been up there when I was a place work in the kitchen.
Yes.
Ann Sullivan, do you remember? Used to work in the
Don't I remember Ann Sullivan at the high school?
No, yeah. you
Post
probably-
office?
Yeah, you probably did.
Post office?
No, yeah.
No, okay.
I used to up there, I used to up the Grove too. I used to work at the Grove.
Yeah.
From 68 till 79.
Well, I was nearly finished then, you see.
Yeah. Well, I was there when Wyndham Smith was there.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah, he was still there.
that's right. He didn't die till after I left.
Yeah, he was still there.
I was the first housemaster of Winder Smith Hall,
Okay.
and had all the dealings with the chef and the catering company
Tanner Galen was there.
Yes,
Right.
and Ralph Pringle was the chef.
Yeah,
And he was an interesting character,
no,
Englishman.
yeah.
The boys were fascinated because he stirred the great big soup kettle
I
with a
know.
hockey stick.
Oh! And he fell underneath it one day.
The reason he did that, of course, was the school didn't supply him with the proper stainless steel paddle.
Well, he had a paddle, a wooden paddle.
But Ralph Pringle was a fascinating man. At the end of the war, he was sent by the English over to organize the food services in the whole of Germany. And they were totally wiped out. And he was that kind of man. He was a big man.
Services where? In Germany.
Michael, what was the significance of the bicycle on your mom and dad's island?
That was Dad's exercise.
Was it?
Because he was blind, walking was perilous,
I thought
as it is for me, but
we went by so often because we were on pyramid case.
Yes.
And it looked so different.
walking is perilous for me too, and I was run over and knocked down by a van this winter. So I now have a little extra.
Oh, wow.
You got a light?
Yeah.
It's okay.
Uh,
I think
Did you, Mike, did you have any adventures on Tosca?
Oh, well, yes, this was sailing with my parents. I've sailed in the Pacific off Royal Roads, Victoria, and out of Halifax, and with my parents in the Gulf of Mexico and over to the Bahamas. And they had, for 8 years, a 32-foot ketch, which they lived aboard, and went from Lake Ontario down to the Bahamas and back, I think, 3 times. Mom insisted on coming back to Stony Lake for the July and August, though. And so the boat sometimes got abandoned, sometimes brought back. But I remember one trip that was wonderful because it doesn't happen to people very often anymore. We left Panama City to destination Fort Myers Beach. And instead of going around the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, which everybody advises because the Gulf of Mexico can get sort of unfriendly, we went straight across. And we didn't see another ship. We saw one plane and I believe one bird in 5 days. And it was hard, clear, sunny, cold weather. It was absolutely gorgeous. Wonderful. Just the 4 of us.
And your mom used to sail Chesapeake and everywhere, and your dad.
Well, that was on the way up and down.
Yeah, but your mom was
Oh, yeah?
on the rudder, and your dad was down below on the radio
Yeah, well, sometimes that.
sometimes.
But the reason that happened, Aileen, is that when they set out, Father had the sailing experience, but never as a captain. He'd always been crew at the Royal Canadian Yacht Club in Toronto. But he did know about sailing. So they bought the boat. That's right. He told my mother that if she passed the Power Squadron course, he'd buy her a boat. Well, she did. So he did. And they set off that first fall for the States. And the first American port of entry was the Coast Guard station on Galoo Island to the south of Kingston. And Father pranged the landing. He bashed the wharf. Mother left and went up to report to the Coast Guard station that they were entering the United States. And when she came back, my father said, "Well, Joni, either you take her or we go home." Well, Mother wasn't having any of that. So she took her. She was the captain for the next 8 years. Remarkable. Yes.
nice lady.
Also, she was also a canoeist. About 2 years before she died, and she already had congestive heart failure, she was desperate to get back to this majestic island in November, and she took her canoe from Kawartha. While she was there, the wind came up, and she managed to paddle over and connect up with the shore close enough to the Juniper Point Road. Dragged her canoe up high enough on the shore to leave for the winter, and thought she'd be able to hitchhike home and not get caught. But unfortunately, a real estate client of my sister-in-law gave her a ride. And So the news to me did come. And I had offered her a ride over to the cottage that day, but she didn't want that. She wanted to paddle her own canoe. Yeah. So that's how I was brought up. And it's made for a very happy life.
And
I
your
said
sis-
that to Len last night.
Your sister had quite an interesting life on a boat too.
Well,
Sonny.
both of them,
Well, yes,
yes,
but Sonny and George
yes. They built their own
built the
50-foot
boat.
in Nova Scotia, chartered her for many years. And my older sister has her captain's papers and has taken that 50-foot boat by herself from one island to another in the Bahamas. And she's just bought another boat at 70, 75. So,
Well, you just
So
bought
have
a new
you,
boat,
how
too.
about telling us about your new boat?
well, yeah, I got a